I think the team has to grow up in many areas, not only in the facilities, the spirit inside the team, the motivation, the targets they need to raise every year.
Fernando Alonso has opened up about his future in the sport, and although he was vastly connected to Mercedes, it seems like this move is slowly but surely fading away after his latest statement. In the situation in which Mercedes found themselves for the third consecutive year, it's safe to assume that their attractiveness as a potential high-valued market is slowly but surely fading away, and Alonso made sure to let them know that this plays a huge role in his decision. With this in mind, has Alonso already committed to Aston Martin? And what is the huge twist coming from the vast majority of the Silverstone-based team when it comes to having Alonso as their driver from 2025 onwards? Fernando Alonso managed to finish ahead of both Mercedes drivers in Suzuka yet again, and the fact that he's vastly responsible for why his team is just 1 point behind the Silver Arrows in the fight for P4 goes to show volumes about where the Silver Arrows currently stand in the F1 world. This is not something that Alonso is willing to ignore for the sake of the 2026 regulations, mostly because he now understands the power that Honda will bring to Aston Martin in the newly regulated era, and how being an independent team compared to Mercedes will give the Silverstone-based squad a lot to hope for. Elaborating on his move to the Silver Arrows, which was something that the vast F1 media have locked in as a logical conclusion after Hamilton's departure, Alonso went on to say, "In Suzuka, I had a lot of fun, which is great to keep on racing. I had one of my best weekends ever, I think, driving, and I'm still 44 seconds behind the leader, so it doesn't feel attractive at the same time. It's a very good question when it comes to me driving for Mercedes, but they're behind us at the moment, so it doesn't feel very attractive. We're definitely slower than Red Bull and Ferrari, they are maybe in another league at the moment. McLaren and Mercedes are faster than us, but Mercedes experimented with the hard tyre. It was a bold strategy, thanks to which we capitalised on the position." It is quite contradictory for Alonso to say that Mercedes are faster than Aston Martin, but then go on to point towards the fact that they're ahead of the Silver Arrows, which, if we're to look at the Constructors' Championship, is not exactly the case. True, Alonso finishes consistently higher than both Mercedes drivers, and this is by far the worst start of a season that Hamilton has had in his career, but then again, Mercedes drivers are more consistent and are at least finishing close to each other, whereas if you look at Lance Stroll, you notice that the discrepancy between him and Alonso is massive and could lead to another sequence of events in which the Spaniard might be forced to look for a seat elsewhere. However, the situation in Mercedes does look desperate, and the bombshell of Alonso did not come out of nowhere. If we're to look at the statements being made by Toto Wolff and Lewis Hamilton, we can simply understand why Alonso might not look at the Silver Arrows and think that this would be a team that will not only grant him more race wins, but will also provide him with the opportunity to fight for a championship as well. Wolff has stated after the race that although there are a lot of things that they've learned about the car, it's still a long journey, and the steps they made are not satisfactory at all, which could have derailed Alonso in the direction of remaining with Aston Martin and Honda for a longer period of time. When talking about the limitations of the car, Wolff went on to say, "We have followed a certain trajectory over the last years and keep turning in circles, and we came to a point to say, okay, we have to do something different here, because we're measuring downforce with our sensors and pressure tabs, and it's telling us we have 70 points more downforce in a particular corner in Melbourne than we had last year. But on the lap time, it's not a kilometre per hour faster, so it doesn't make any sense. So where is the limitation? I think we wanted to tick some boxes to understand, is there any limitation we've spotted? I think there is. Now, if we are to compare the progress that Mercedes made to the rest of the grid, it's evident that it's not nearly as close as Ferrari and McLaren, with both of these teams believing to have a stable platform to build their challenges on and bring more upgrades, whereas Mercedes will have to wait for Imola and see whether the experiments they've planned will work wonders or not. The deficit that they've compared to the rest of the grid is massive, and right now, the team has made such a small step forward that they've effectively dropped in the midfield fighting with Aston Martin, rather than being in the front and battling for race wins with the Ferraris, McLarens, and let alone the Red Bulls. Furthermore, Wolff went on to expand further on whether or not the team acknowledges the position in which they are and how will that influence their driver choice, which could further drop a shade on Alonso despite his statements against Mercedes due to the fact that the Silverstone-based team are not really prone on keeping a driver who is reluctant as Alonso. Elaborating on this matter even further, Wolff went on to say, "I believe that the team is in a rebuilding phase right now. We need to acknowledge that now, 3 years into the regulations. We have got to do things differently from what we've done in the past without throwing overboard what we believe is goodness in the way we operate. And rebuild could mean putting a young driver in there and giving him an opportunity with less pressure and fighting for victories immediately, or putting a more experienced driver in the car that can help us dig ourselves out of the current performance picture." A very interesting turn of events happened regarding the likability of Alonso in the Aston Martin camp, and the fact that he flirted with the opportunity to leave the team for a better environment like Mercedes has made a lot of people angry in the Silverstone-based squad. And now the general belief is that a huge part of them want to see Alonso gone because he is publicly downplaying the opportunity that Aston Martin has in the upcoming period. According to a report from motorsport.com, the Green team are looking more towards having Sainz as their go-to driver, due to the fact that he would be a much more stable factor for their team than Alonso. After all, the situation is not looking great right now, because while they're making improvements and are moving fast towards the ladder, if they have a driver who is reluctant to stay and will jump ship at the first moment if a more competitive team gives him an offer, which is likely to be Mercedes from 2026 onwards, then having a driver like Sainz would benefit the Aston Martin team a lot more than they could anticipate. But Sainz won't be standing still, and while Aston Martin is probably one of the best and most competitive options that the Spaniard could choose for his career, we mustn't forget that the 2026 regulations will have a massive impact on how the grid reshuffles, and Mercedes could have the upper hand against all of the teams, even though Hamilton's move to Ferrari suggests otherwise. Regardless, Red Bull have also opened up on having Sainz in their camp as a potential replacement for Perez, and as a statement when it comes to proving that there is no other driver who is bigger than the team, which was constantly in the news in the past couple of months due to the fight that happened between the ownership of Red Bull. So even though the situation is looking quite desperate for Mercedes, given the fact that they're unable to present a competitive package to the available drivers on the grid, the Silver Arrows are not going to give up on the pursuit of signing a high-profile member who could bring them in the best possible place from the 2025 season onwards. Regardless, the primary goal is placed on the 2026 regulations, because this is where Mercedes believes they're miles ahead of their competition, considering the fact that 40% downforce will be reduced from the cars and the power will be equal to the ICE and the electrical unit of the car. With all this in mind, what do you think about Alonso's statements regarding Mercedes? And more importantly, do you think that there is any opportunity the Silver Arrows can present a more competitive package in the following years so that they'll be able to attract drivers like Sainz to their camp? Let us know in the comments down below.